This is the birth of woke. The word wasn't being used then. It was a slang term that appeared here and there before roughly 2008 to 2011, 12. But this is the birthplace of woke. This is the place where something got stuck into deconstructionism that could not be deconstructed, and it is the experience of systemic oppression by identity. So this is the place where we have to start. If we want to understand words like diversity, inclusion, equity, racism, everything, you have to understand that this worldview about power is where they come from. You can't appeal to the facts, you can't appeal to reason, you can't appeal to a reasonable person standard or what a fair-minded person might think, you can't appeal to faith, because those are all applications of power by a means that people don't recognize as an application of power and have fooled themselves into believing are methodologically rigorous or objective or for some other reason legitimate. These are people who have fooled themselves into believing that the power they gave themselves to be authenticators of truth are natural. It is fooling yourself to believe that they are rigorous. It is fooling yourself to believe that they are anything other than a base application of identity politics by other means, in particular, white, Western, often straight, male ways of knowing. And so now we have this cultural relativism that has come out of postmodern thinking, that one culture does not have the necessary epistemic or ethical tools to judge another culture. And we add in the critical theory dichotomy of oppressor versus oppressed that drives back to Marx. And there is now an answer. All the cultural methods of producing knowledge, of producing truth, of speaking, of organizing society, all of them are equal except the one produced by straight white men in Europe under the Enlightenment. That one's bad. That one's wrong. And so this is the world that we live in now. So we have this view of power that works this way, that it's always, that it's everywhere, it's imminent. When there's an act of racism, the only reason there was an act of racism is because we live in a society that has produced a system that would allow an act of racism to occur. It wouldn't be possible to be racist, for a racist action or act or belief or word, if we lived in a society where it wasn't permissible. So this is totalitarian. Even if we were to then scrub all of the racist acts and actions, beliefs, words, deeds out of society, though, the system itself, being built with racist biases, as they say, would remain racist, and racism would still be occurring without a single racist person, act, belief, word, deed, anything. This is the view that they have. The system itself is racist because it was formed under the conditions of racism by people who didn't know that they were racist and falsely believed that they were objective, where objectivity, in the words of the now famous author Robin DiAngelo, is something that we should consider neither possible nor desirable. Instead, we should have subjectivism, the subjective experience of the lived reality of systemic oppression is the only and highest truth, and it carries with it an ethical imperative to make it visible and to tear it apart. So I'll give you an example within critical race theory. Critical race theory is very famous. I know some of you will have heard this example. I've given it a number of times. Too lazy to think of another one. I mean, it works, right? You just keep doing the same thing. So this is how critical race theory, since it's so popular, you need to understand, this is how it analyzes the situation. So I want you to envision for a moment that you run a shop or a store, something like a tailor shop, something where you have to come out and work one-on-one for a number of minutes with each customer as they come in. And through whatever set of circumstances, you're working alone that day, you're behind the counter, the bell rings, the door opens, and in very short order, 2 people enter before you can react, but not in a way where you have the impression that they're together. They just happen to arrive roughly at the same time. And one of these people is white and one of these people is black. You're the only one there, so you have to make a zero-sum decision of who you help first, the white person or the black person. Now, the fundamental assumption of critical race theory is that these systems of power are immanent. They are everywhere. They are always. They are permanent. And they bear on every social interaction, every phenomenon. They are present. in everything. That is the fundamental operating assumption of critical race theory. So the question, as our friend Robin DiAngelo put it, is not, did racism take place? It is, how did racism manifest in that situation? That's a quote. She's given this quote multiple times, both in writing and in speech. The question is not, did racism take place, but how did racism manifest in that situation? Racism is to be assumed. So you now have your choice. Anybody in here want to go to the white person first? What a shock. Not a single one. Bunch of racists. So you're racist. You're all racists. You're all racist. You know why you're racist? Because you think black people can't be trusted to be left alone in that store for a few minutes while you help another customer. You think they might steal something. Or maybe you actually wanted to help the white person. You really did. But you didn't want to be seen helping a white person first, so you had to perform. You had to pretend that you're anti-racist. Your decision was riddled with racism. The question was not, did racism take place? It was, how did it manifest in that situation? And it's that you don't trust black people and you wanted to get them out. You racist. Anybody want to pick the white person now? Still no. Amazing. Pause. Think about what that means. Nobody wants to pick the white person first. That's the very definition of bias, by the way. Every single one of you somehow intuit that in this new world, a colorblind choice was wrong. None of you want to help the white person first. Well, that's good, because that would be racist too, by the way. Of course, because racism, of course, must be present. It's not, did it take place, but how did it manifest in that situation? And it's obviously because you saw white people as first-class citizens, black people as second-class citizens who have to wait, or maybe you just prefer working with members of your own race first if you're white, or maybe it's that you, any number of things. This is the way that these woke critical theories analyze the world. Why? Because one, the systemic idea of power must be present in all things. The job of the critical theorist is to make it visible and to agitate for social activism around it, like burning your store down later after they put it on social media what a racist you were. And three, because truth doesn't matter. There is no truth. Objective truth doesn't matter. Even if we were to ask, well, what was your motivation? Why did you choose as you chose? Doesn't matter. Even if it could be shown by some test that you were absolutely true, doesn't matter. There's probably some implicit bias at work. Truth doesn't matter. Impact, not intent. The impact was racist because somebody was able to write racism into the story, and that's all it takes. This is the woke ideology. Everything must be analyzed through power in this way. In other words, everything must be reduced to a simple understanding, a cartoonish understanding of systemic power that thinks that everything that happens intentionally must have racism in it, and that everything that happens that produces disparate outcomes, even if we can find no evidence of racism, must be the result of racism that is tucked somewhere in all the cracks and corners. It's a weird room to say this in, but it's the racism of the gaps. I know that many of you have probably heard that God of the gaps thing here or there. It's the racism of the gaps. We don't know why the outcomes are different. Must be racism. That's systemic racism. That's how you must analyze the world. And I've focused on racism, but we could do the same thing with sex, with gender, with sexuality, with ability status, with fat status, with that exasperated, etc. Intersectionally. As a whatever, you have to whatever, you're whatever. You know, as a black man, I have to acknowledge that I'm black and therefore I have a certain understanding of systemic oppression, but as a man, I have to defer to my female colleagues. You know, we've heard these things before. That's called engaging positionality. The rule in intersectionality as a practice is that intersectionality must be intentionally engaged. That's how you must think about the world. If you grok this, then we can talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Until this, you don't get it. So when I tell you that diversity doesn't mean what we think it means, like let's bring in people with different perspectives, they think that the only different perspectives that could possibly matter are ones rooted in identity.
My name is Zana, and I'm doing this video because we need to talk. It's become clear to me that a great deal of us suffer from the illness of patriarchy, and it's not just the men who suffer. Women can be patriarchal too. So many things in our system today come from patriarchy, including racism, colonialism, capitalism, classism, and of course, sexism. I'm a woman of color, so I'm going to talk about my experience. But many other marginalized people, such as indigenous peoples and queer and transgender people and gender non-conforming people, will have their own thoughts on this also. It's because of a phenomenon called white fragility and male fragility. White liberals and men in general have been told over and over again that if they just never use the N-word and they never talk about race and they never physically molest anyone, then they're not racist or sexist. So when I point out that actually the system of power we live in ensures that all white people are racist and all men are sexist because they profit from a system that marginalizes people of color and non-males, they attack me, just as they've attacked women of color for centuries to retain their power structure.